Hi and welcome. This week's episode of Destination Film is coming to you from Ocho Rios, Jamaica. I am at the Goldeneye Resort, former home of Ian Fleming, author of the Bond novels. After having covered 6 or 7 American cities now, I wanted to come to somewhere much more distinctive, much more unique. And I have long been captivated by Jamaica, the movies shot here, the culture of the island. I want to come here for a week and see what the filmmaking scene is like, see what the challenges and opportunities are. I flew in yesterday to Montego Bay, rented a car and drove here to see a little bit more of the island up close. Though for the last couple of weeks I've been talking to pretty much any Jamaican filmmaker I can find online. There is an incredibly vibrant filmmaking scene on the island with movies like Get a Life, Sprinter on Netflix, that are made by Jamaican filmmakers for the Jamaican market, are watched internationally. But Jamaica has also been a favorite location for filmmakers for over 50 years. Because Fleming wrote the Bond novels here and he wrote what he knew, a lot of the Bond novels are set around Jamaica. And as a result, a lot of the films have been filmed here, especially Live and Let Die with Roger Moore and No Time to Die, the latest Bond, where Bond retires in a place not unlike Fleming's villa as it was when he lived here in the 60s. The countryside itself is stunning. You have these wild mist-shrouded mountains with crystal blue streams running straight into the sapphire waters of the Caribbean. The film industry in Jamaica is still very small compared to any major American city. Outside of local television, there are probably only about 1,000 people who are directly involved in the film industry full-time, and a lot of those people, either talent or crew, go back and forth to America when there's not work in Jamaica. The flight from New York City is only about $150 in low season and takes about 3 hours. From Miami, it's not even an hour. Jamaica has a history, drama, a passion, and an excitement that makes it absolutely unique place for storytelling. Characters, textures, and music that have been inspiring to writers for decades. And I'm really excited to explore the island, meet some of the filmmakers here, and get their take on why this is such an interesting place for filmmaking. So let's start by talking about why Jamaica is such a unique location. It has thousands and thousands of waterfalls, most of which flow straight down into the ocean. It has an incredible collection of caves, a lot of which are on the west coast in Negril. Filming here goes all the way back to the 50s and 20,000 leagues under the sea. Kingston, the largest city in Jamaica, is home to about half the population of the country. And while it has really modern areas, it also has incredible looking suburbs. The weather in Jamaica is typical for a Caribbean island, but if you haven't experienced it, it takes a lot of getting used to. 30 degrees Celsius every single day, even in the winter, going up into the high 30s in the summer. It is high humidity and the sun is just brutal. I live in a cold climate and am not particularly adapted to hot areas, but I found it almost too hot to even be outside most of the day. The infrastructure in Jamaica, while not as good as the developed world, is vastly better than most parts of the Caribbean. It's roughly equivalent to Puerto Rico, decades ahead of places like Haiti and Cuba. Roads can be good, like the toll road from Kingston to the north coast, or it can be a one-lane, pothole-filled goat path through the mountains like I drove, where you really can't go over 3 or 4 miles an hour lest you break your axle in half. Honestly, for me, it was just part of the adventure. It was much harder to find cast, crew, and locations in Jamaica, but I was determined to shoot something while I was here. The locations and the view are just too good not to capture. I did find an actress through Instagram and shot inside my hotel. I wanted to do a super simple scene with my filmmaking rig that I brought along, shooting on the R5C with compressed RAW. I got a couple of different takes of the entrance, then her coming out onto the balcony and this amazing view of looking out into the mountains, into the city. The sun would be shining through these beautiful slatted windows. Before we had finished, the sun went behind a cloud, but I was able to simulate the same sort of light, shooting a nan light Forza 60C through the window to create the same effect. I really like working like this because you're using the environment as it is, but then by using artificial lighting, you're sort of freezing the moment and giving yourself much, much longer to capture the scene without racing against the sun. I use this new device from Benro, the QRB95, to get both vertical and horizontal content. After the sun had set, I also wanted to use the RGB capabilities of the Forza 60C to create a similar look, bouncing the light. This would have been great with more actors and more time, but I enjoyed these creative projects of trying to make something from nothing. Jamaica is overflowing with natural wonders, but it also has an incredible human history. I visited the Good Hope property, which started 250 years ago as a sugar plantation. It's still a working farm and an ecotourism destination. Set on a hill overlooking the river, most of the buildings are still perfectly preserved. I was also able to meet up with Darren Scott, a local cinematographer, to talk about Jamaica's film industry and what it's like living and shooting there.
Just everything kind of combines into making it like a big experience. Yeah. Some of the challenges here, our industry isn't necessarily like formalized. It's a bit disjointed, but it's definitely getting better, and it's hard to get crew. I think you have to know the right people. With the right people, you definitely can get a majority of what you need. I think you should come here with an open mind. I think there is a perception of Jamaica, and when you get here, see reality. Jamaica is pretty chill, and don't venture too much in like places that you just don't know without people that aren't from the area. The budgets are tighter, so we have to get more done within a shorter space of time. The travel time in between two places, you might have to take into consideration a lot of potholes, or traffic at a certain time. Sometimes the producers will get police escorts, take us through traffic. We do that a lot. Like, that's the only way we can cut down the time.
When it comes to filmmaking, Jamaica is a outsider. It is very hard to classify it. Is it cheap to shoot here? It really depends on what you're shooting and how long you're going to be. Filmmaking in the United States is much more of a known entity. There are standard prices, there are rules of supply and demand. Whereas Jamaica, everything is much more of a negotiation, much more fluid, much more liquid. It really depends on who you are, what you want to do, and who you know, and when you're here. There are essentially two main ways to operate here if you're making a film. One is to bring all your cast and crew from outside. That makes it much easier to cast people, makes it much easier to crew people, because you can work with people you've already worked with before. You know they'll be there. They don't have a choice to show up to set because they'll be staying in the same resort or villa or house as you. Yes, you will have to feed them and house them and pay for their transportation, but none of those things are outrageously expensive in Jamaica, especially if you're here in the low season, which is not the tourist boom. You can get a 5-bedroom house that will sleep normal sized indie crew for $500 or $600 a week. And food here outside of the resorts and the hotels is much cheaper than the US. But everyone will be having the same difficulties in Jamaica that you as the filmmaker are. This includes finding gear, travel, and all the downsides of being an outsider in a very insular place. The other alternative is to come here alone and find your cast and crew in Jamaica. You can probably get those for a comparative rate for an indie crew in the US, but as I found out while I was here, it is unknown whether people are going to show up on the day when you've asked them to, because as an outsider, you really have no track record. You haven't built up any goodwill, and you're unlikely to have future projects that you can promise them as an incentive for the current shoot. Add to that the fact that the geography of Jamaica is pretty challenging. The film industry, both cast and crew, is based in Kingston, which is the opposite side of the island. It's about a 2.5-3 hour drive from the North Shore, where all or most of the famous and usable locations are. Which means that if you're doing a multi-day shoot, you'll have to accommodate and feed your local crew anyway. Most people that shoot in Jamaica use a combination of this, bringing some department heads and cast from the USA, and then hiring local people on some days for some roles in some positions, depending on what that particular day calls for and where you're shooting. And if a big production, like an international movie like Bond, comes to the island, then that sucks up all the talented cast and crew and leaves you scrambling to shoot otherwise. Another epiphany I had while being here was that it can be really hard to be in a strange place for the first time and go about the daily business of life. Where you're going to eat, where you're going to sleep, how you're going to get from place to place. All of those things are unfamiliar and work differently in strange countries. It's not that it's bad, it can be wonderful, but it takes up a lot of your mental effort. And that can be really difficult if you're trying to make a creative endeavor like a film on top of that daily grind. For instance, if you sit down somewhere to eat in a roadside cafe or a nice restaurant, you're going to be there for probably an hour. Everything is much, much more drawn out than I'm used to in the US or Australia. It is a much slower pace of life, and there's no real way you can hurry that process along. You just have to embrace it. On my last day here, I finally realized what makes Jamaica so special. One of the true joys of cinema is to transport the audience to a place not only have they never been, but one that they didn't know existed and didn't think possible. Jamaica, as I've seen it over the last week, is exactly that sort of place. Life here is so different. It's full of contradictions and amazing solutions. Around every corner is some wild new architecture or incredibly vivid flower or incredible view of rain over mountains or a city spread out below. That is why so many films have come here. It's an incredible combination of people, music, culture, landscape that make this tiny island famous all over the world. Actually, just being here feels like a movie.